the way in which my interest in women rough sleepers came about initially, it was indeed to do with a very small project that we secured in Shrewsbury. This was for the Shrewsbury Rough Sleepers Task Force. What we found out was that their particular rough sleeper problem was due to the ineffective resettlement policies of a local female prison. And since that time, we've actually spoken to a lot of women rough sleepers right across Europe, and it's taught us a huge amount, not least that female rough sleeping can really happen to anyone. We've talked to professional women, to mothers, to students, women in violent relationships. There really are no stereotypes. One of the major precipitators for this is the experience of domestic abuse. Now, unfortunately, we all know that violence in relationships is still all too common. And again, women from all walks of life are affected. That's irrespective of race, class, income. Female homelessness as a consequence of domestic abuse. And I've given it the subtitle, From Hidden Crime to Hidden Homelessness, because I'm going to suggest that these links and the impact that they have on women are not fully recognised. So what evidence is there for this? In December last year, the charity Women's Aid reported that of the 113 women killed in the UK last year, 85 died in their own homes, and 9 out of 10 were killed by a current or former partner. But to reiterate, for women with secure social networks, finding a solution might be traumatic, but they may have help or advice to, for example, remove a partner from a tenancy, secure a non-molestation order or an occupation order. For those women that I've mentioned who lack social networks, the only escape might be the street. I feel that at the least it indicates that there are significant and important links to be made between female homelessness and the female experience of domestic abuse. Homeless counts and statistics are just not accurate at all. Whilst official data is important, the reality of this data does depend on the current definitions of homelessness that are being applied by the government and how the counting is in fact carried out. And due to the constraints of time this evening, obviously I can't talk about all of those, so I'm just going to mention the first of these, which is the issue of sex work, sexual exploitation and sex for rent. The homeless charity Shelter reports that 28% of females who find themselves sleeping rough have had unwanted sex to get a bed for the night. Another problem is the issue of consent, and that lies at the heart of every rape and sexual assault incident. And according to the Sexual Offences Act, consent is only given when a person has the freedom and the capacity to make that choice. So a woman might initially agree to her landlord's terms, maybe out of sheer desperation, and then find herself trapped, not only economically, but mentally and physically too. Don't get me wrong, homeless services do exist, of course they do, but there are simply not enough women's refuges and hostels. And there's a huge shortage of female key workers. And we know that some women just won't talk to a man because of their experiences of domestic abuse. Other women choose not to go into hostels because most of the hostels are mixed. Some women who try to get into female hostels have been asked to prove that they have been abused. How on earth are you supposed to do that? Now, with that in mind, the government has pledged a new radical approach to tackling homelessness, and we're going to get a new Homeless Reduction Act coming into force, in fact, next month. The final issue I want to mention in relation to what could help is the adoption of more gender-informed approaches to women's homelessness. Now, the lack of gendered approaches to women's homelessness and homelessness definitions means that all housing policies are generic and assume that most homeless people are men, or that all homeless women have the same problems. And that's arguably led to a one-size-fits-all approach, and that doesn't allow for the complexity of women's experiences. So, to conclude, what I think underpins all of this is the real need to establish a much more comprehensive understanding that women's homelessness is caused by a very complex interrelation of societal and individual factors occurring in certain circumstances to certain people. Now, there are inherent problems, of course, not least the fact that certain attitudes prevail in relation to the homeless. People often say to me, well, lots of people have problems, but they don't all end up homeless, do they? This is true. But homelessness for some people occurs in a context where they may be excluded from accessing the necessary resources that they need to cope with the challenging events that we all face in life, in which men and women's opportunities and vulnerabilities are still governed in many ways by gender relations and social expectations. Because of the gendering of women, homelessness for them has often been viewed as a transgression of societal norms. Crucially, also, it negates the possibility of acknowledging the idea that the home can actually be a site of oppression for many women, and what can ultimately lead them to the street. So raising the profile of this very hard to reach and little understood group of women is the first step, and it absolutely needs to continue if the lives of vulnerable women, some of whom may well already be in our networks, are to be changed for the better. After all, whilst female homelessness might be out of sight, it certainly needn't be out of mind.